So thank you, Harry, for joining me today. We have known each other for quite a while, a number of years. We worked together previously at a different agency, and I'm really pleased that you could talk to me today about influencer marketing, about content creators and user-generated content, because I consider you to be an oracle of all of that. You've got years and years of experience, so I want to try and pull all that information from you and pick your brain. I have some questions myself personally, and I've actually done a round of Passion Digital because I know that everyone is really curious about content creation, user-generated content, how brands are working with content creators in 2023. So I've got some questions from other people in the agency, which is going to be really exciting, and see how you answer those. So to start with, why don't you introduce yourself, your agency, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here and answering the questions. Hopefully you've got some good answers. So yeah, Katie, you kind of touched on it a little bit already. I have been involved in this space for a long, long time before arguably it was even a space that people felt worthy of being involved in. So kind of back in the days, probably uploaded my first bit of content probably 14, 15 years ago. So and predominantly started out on Facebook, weirdly enough, alongside a bit of YouTube, and then have kind of moved with the times and ended up on all of them now. But off the back of that, because my content is slightly more niche and it's kind of musical and not in like a singer-songwriter way, really, I realized there's perhaps more opportunity for me on the business side of it, and that was the bit that I kind of I guess naturally went towards anyway. I really enjoyed that side of things, helping people land better deals, helping companies, friends companies in the very early days work with creators in a better way. And that's where the agency was born. And as you said, Katie, we worked together previously. The agency that, you had a big rollout previous to this new role as well, in Passion is kind of closely aligned with what we were doing, because your expertise lies in content, and all of this becomes content and is content in many ways. And so through that kind of partnership, we were working quite closely together. And yeah, I've just kind of always looked at this space as it's fun and exciting, but it's more than that, because it does have, if you get it right, it does have the power to truly influence, not just kind of drive sales, sure, but change people's opinions, change people's minds, open them to new possibilities, and kind of make them buy into something on perhaps a deeper level, rather than just kind of impulse purchases, which you can do as well. But yeah, hopefully we'll get into how that can happen today, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that leads on to the first question really nicely, because I think being in the industry ourselves, we kind of understand the role, as you'd mentioned, of content within the influencer world. Like, content is, I'm not going to say king, I'm not going to say it because that's cliche. It is all content, essentially. But what I have seen more so is brands working with influencers in more of a content creator role. So from your perspective in 2023 and potentially going forward, should we consider influencers to just be content creators? Is influencer a bad word now?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think influencer has ended up with a bad word, as a bad word, largely due to the press. I think there's a big problem with whenever something bad happens, they're called an influencer, and I think that's just because it's the term that most people know. Calling them content creators is a lot more kind of industry specific. Us in the marketing world will perhaps call them content creators. They might call themselves content creators. Whereas influencer, I think, has always been attached to kind of Love Island contestants and TOWIE cast members by mainstream media. I think for me the key difference is that an influencer is someone people listen to. So I think the term that's bandied around is normally people like to say it's someone who's an expert in a field, but you don't have to be. For example, celebrities and famous people, certain celebrities or famous people might have the power to influence people just off the back of being funny. So an influencer is in basic terms, anyone who can, either change opinions or inspire action. A content creator is someone who makes content. And so you can be both. Some influencers are terrible at making content. They don't actually make their own content. Some they've got a team behind them. But some content creators aren't influencers.
Can
So,
you spill any tea and tell us who's an influencer who doesn't create their own content? I've actually not
well,
heard
I
of
mean,
that, to be honest.
yeah, do you know, I mean, I think in that term, I guess it would kind of be in the digital world, it's kind of a level you aspire to be at, right? So most of them have started off as content creators, but now have full teams. So you look at people like, the Sidemen and Beta Squad and stuff, they're not filming or editing their own videos, and they couldn't, not because they couldn't in terms of technical skill, they couldn't in terms of time. So, are they still content creators? I suppose they're part of the content. They're more kind of hosts now, and they've got people creating the content, but they are, real, genuine influencers. Same with celebrities. They probably never, some of them probably never picked up a camera in their life and filmed a vlog, but they are able to influence. So, they're kind of, the two things go hand in hand a lot of the time, but they're not one and the same.
Okay, I think that's a really good way to kind of explain the nuances, the difference between them as well. And like you said, working within the industry, we have a very different perception of the output of what influencers can do for brands and for ourselves if we're working with them on behalf of a brand. When it comes to an ROI, essentially, we have a number of clients who are really interested in working with influencers for content creation purposes, but they are sometimes hesitant because of investing in them and being wary of what return they'll get, especially in today's economy. We've seen from an organic perspective, it's very difficult to secure investment versus paid channels, for example, where the return is immediate. So given the landscape, what are ways that you could more guarantee, or not guarantee, I suppose that's a risky word, kind of hope for a more tangible return for brands from working with influencers?
Yeah, so I think it's like you say, there are certain brands or clients who really, kind of double down on organic and awareness, and look at it as kind of they need to start from the top of the funnel, and a lot that quite rightly so in many respects with the economic situation, and also just the challenges of running a business, really want to just see an instant return on investment. I think the only real way to connect the two of influencer marketing, if there isn't the option to just go all out with sales, is because if you can, so I'll just add, if you can go all out with sales, then combining influencer marketing with paid social advertising using boosted content tool or TikTok Spark ads is a fantastic way of driving sales directly and as a result of your influencer content. But if that's not an option, if you've got something that requires, a perhaps more drawn out purchase decision, or something that maybe requires a bit more trust than you can deliver from one TikTok or one YouTube video, then what we like to do is try and funnel it into another form of their marketing that then focuses on continuing to build on that. So for example, the best example I can give is if you use influencers and their organic content if you know that you're not going to be able to just instantly drive sales, can you use the awareness from the influencer content to build an email list full of people who have seen you exclusively from influencer content, and A/B test how that converts over a period of time against your existing data? We've done that and seen that convert as much as 4 times better than like the next best source of data. And that might be a few months in the future, but it is a good way to at least say, look, this is a slightly longer term project, which I suppose they'd have to understand if they knew that they didn't sell kind of instantly all the time based off, typical things other than impulse. So that's at least one way you can kind of connect the dots.
That's a really interesting thought process or kind of strategy behind it, and I really do understand from seeing your process and having talked with you a number of times and collaborated on pitch decks with you for clients. Your process for kind of matching influencers with brands is, to me, something that should be talked about more. That really gives that the solidity to what you're doing and the strategy behind it. So can you explain what your process for matching up brands with influencers is? Because it's not as simple as putting your finger in the air and kind of pulling out whoever has the biggest following.
No, it's not. And it's probably not an answer people want to hear, but it's time. It's all in time and casting your eye over everything. So there's a few different things we look at when we're looking at an influencer. And I think one of the key things for us, first of all, is you've got to take a deep dive of their profile for a couple of different reasons. One of the main reasons for us will be checking for work with competitors in the space, and that's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily rule someone out instantly, but how did they talk about that person, so that brand. So for example, if you're working with a paint supplier, and they've worked with another paint supplier, and there are different USPs, and all they mentioned was the USP of this one, it might not necessarily rule them out, because people do buy from various different paint suppliers throughout their life. However, if they say that this is the only paint supplier you'll ever need, it's the best one in the world, nothing else is ever going to be as good as this, it's not going to look incredibly authentic if they then advertise another one, because they've left no space for that. So that's one thing. I think the other thing as well, when you're selecting influencers, the best thing you can do is just trawl through the comments, and take a look at how people are actually engaging with a post. If they're just leaving a bunch of fire emojis, then they're getting comments, they're getting the numbers, but what has that led to? And because a lot of influencers don't come with ready-made case studies of their exact ROI, they only have those kind of top-level metrics. Comments can be a great way to see how people actually respond, especially to their advertising content. Did people say, oh, thanks to this, I've just gone and booked? It's not concrete evidence that they have. I've just gone and bought this, or I'm going to check this out. It's not concrete evidence that they have or will, but it's a much stronger indication than anything else you're likely going to get. So those are a lot of things. In terms of finding the influencers in the first place, the platforms are fantastic at recommending similar accounts to you these days. So it's all about just finding that first person who really aligns with the brand, really aligns with your brand. And a lot of the time, what you'll find is there'll be someone in the company who already has this one person who's like, oh, if we could work with them, that would be who we work with. So asking around within a business, finding out, who they all think makes the most sense, and then expanding on that by checking the factors I just mentioned, is normally our kind of at a very basic level, our process.
Well, that's really smart though, because you're kind of utilizing your own network of people who, already, chances are there are going to be millennials, Gen Zs working every company. They're going to be on social media. They're going to have been following a number of influencers for a number of years. So they're already going to have an affiliation, understand the content, understand the style and the tone of voice. And then also, I think a point you made there, which is really smart, is about kind of using the algorithm to your benefit. If you find an influencer you like, it's going to show you more in a similar vein. So that's a really good way to go down the rabbit hole, I think. And just mentioning there about reading through the comments as well. So I follow a lot of beauty influencers, and they must have, I'm sure of it, and actually it could be something to look into, which would be really interesting. I feel like beauty influencers probably have the highest conversion rate of any type of influencer, because the product is so low value in a way. It's very an accessible price point. And when looking through the comments, like for example, you must have seen on socials about Sophia Richie's wedding this past weekend. So everything on my TikTok was all about what makeup she was using, which hair products, and they're like $15, $20, so accessible. So I think that kind of goes back to our point about influencers actually being able to bring a tangible sales return, and you can actually track that through the comments if you engage with it in that way. Yeah,
exactly. It's all about, what people are saying is the next best alternative to kind of the hard data. And like you say, especially in the beauty world, it can be a bit of an impulse purchase off the back of someone seeing something and thinking that looks nice, I'll get it. But there are a lot of brands that kind of can benefit from that same kind of mentality and attitude as well. So it's only really kind of the large high ticket purchase once a year kind of things that maybe don't get that advantage. But in this day and age, there's a lot of things that people, I think, in the age of social media and online shopping and everything, and Klarna and credit cards and all of that, people are slightly more impulsive, rightly or wrongly, with their purchasing. So it is something we need to be aware of and, trying to take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question I have is a bit of a granular one. I think it comes from, someone at the agency wanting to really understand more of what it would look like on a logistical basis to work with an influencer. So having worked with a number of them very closely for years, what would you say, speaking on behalf of them, or when you're briefing an influencer, for example, for a campaign, or even if it's just for a series of videos to promote a service, what does a good brief look like? What do they need to know in order for you to get the results that you're probably expecting in your head?
Okay, so we have a few kind of elements in our briefs, and they always follow the same template. So I think, and then there's kind of a key thing as well, which I think is the point of difference, which I'll give away because I imagine we're not the only people to do it anyway. So we always like to keep things as short as possible, because if someone sees something really, if we want them to actually understand a bit more about the client that they're promoting than they do already, if you send them a gigantic, 12-page brief that each page is absolutely chock full of text, they're probably going to scroll all the way down to the bit that's the only bit, which is what do I have to say and are there any guidelines for making the content, and they'll skip out anything you want them to know about the client that might give them a bit more belief in them, and therefore a bit more authenticity, because you can give them things to say, and some people are really talented presenters and would be able to make that sound convincing no matter what, but actually some people might not. And it's little things like talking about things that the company has done or achieved, or maybe done for the good of the world or a community, that just kind of, again, subconsciously, hopefully get into that influence, get that creator's mind, and make them feel more positively about the company, so that naturally comes across. But you do want to keep that really short. We always give a brief introduction to the campaign, and we always include a compliment in there. So it'll always be something like, this, and it is true. We'll say, we're looking to do this, and that's why we're choosing, our favorite creators in this space, like yourself. Always make it personally. Always put the person's name on it as well, so that it's not just the same. Even if it's the same campaign, it takes a second to change a name. Again, just kind of grabs their attention a bit more if they see their name on the first page in big bold text. An example of content, and if you don't have one, just try and film one yourself, even if really brief. That's not always possible depending on what the content actually is, but at least give some tips or find something that's stylistically similar, so they kind of know. And a couple of basic tips as well for people who are perhaps influencers but not natural content creators, like filming good lighting, blah blah blah. But the number one thing that I found, which is I think what helps us a lot, is a lot of brands and agencies, when they brief an influencer, they give them like a script, like an example script, and then they say, but use your own words. If you say that, 9 times out of 10, they will not use their own words. They will just reel off that script because you've given it to them. So what we like to do instead is say what we'd like them to mention, but don't spell it out in a way that they could copy and paste, just speak out loud, because that forces them, it gives them the information, but it forces them to put it into their own words. And that way, every ad you get is slightly different from each influencer, no matter what. And hopefully they come out with some kind of little gems of their own as well. So it's one thing to tell people, do it yourself, but actually if you kind of give it to them, but say do it yourself, they'll just take what you've given. So you kind of got to force them into doing it themselves a little bit. So that's kind of, I think that's what helps us a lot in briefs.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think exemplary content, even if, like you said, you're filming it yourself, I think is a really good way of illustrating, because it's like working with designers. There is no way they can see inside your head what it is you're envisioning. 9 times out of 10, the person on the end who is doing the briefing kind of has a vision for what they want for it. So the more explicit you can be, literally, visually, I think the better.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you could probably even use like AI nowadays to like mock something up, like some kind of example of setting or background or whatever. So, you've got to use the tools that are there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of keywords and algorithms, our next question is about TikTok being a search engine. So I find it really interesting. I see this all over my For You page, and it's an interesting phenomenon to working within marketing, within an organic team, working with content marketers who specialize in SEO, in content creation for SEO, to then see all these influencers go, guys, have you heard of this thing called search engine optimization? And applying those, the tactics of search engine optimization to TikTok, because it is a search engine. And people have been doing it for a number of years with Pinterest, because Pinterest is a huge search engine. It's not just a visual medium. Have you seen influencers and content creators that you're working with kind of, suddenly realize actually this can be utilized, and applying those, SEO principles to content creation and seeing rewards from it?
Yeah, definitely. A lot through TikTok. I think I'd say probably there's no way of really fully knowing whether it's relevant to Instagram, I think. Not that I've seen anyway. So someone in the comments, feel free to correct me on that. TikTok and YouTube, though, massively. I think, with everyone will have seen when they go on TikTok and you watch a video and the search bars are automatically populated with something hopefully relevant to the video, depending on whether it's got it right. But 9 times out of 10, it has. And that's pulled from a mixture, supposedly pulled from a mixture of the caption, the hashtags, mixed with actually what it can detect within the video, what's happening, which is why sometimes the search bar will be nothing to do with the caption or the text, but perhaps something that's specifically within that video. I personally have used that a lot. I try and write all of my captions in a way that either inspires engagement or hopefully helps from an SEO perspective on TikTok. I think a mixture of the two on TikTok is best. Obviously, now that you can do kind of these gigantic captions as well on TikTok, it's interesting to see that a lot of creators that have started to kind of blow up in a massive way, especially around informative content, have basically copy and pasted the script of the video into this caption. Again, I don't think there's any data or any way of seeing any solid proof that that's worked, but I have seen a lot of people do it and have a lot of success from it when they've done it. So definitely something to consider, and perhaps something that the algorithm is rewarding. On a YouTube side of it as well, with shorts, having shorts now ranking Google is huge. One of mine, an example I always use, I'll rinse this until the day it fades away, is that if you Google how to write an indie song, or the first result is a YouTube short that I made, and it doesn't have millions of views. In fact, it started being the first result when it only had about 30,000 views. I think it's now got about 500,000, but it's from the title and the caption as well, which you can actually add a caption to shorts through YouTube Studio. Whether that again factors in, unsure, but it's worth a try. And the tags as well, which again from YouTube Studio you can add not just in the title as you can on the mobile app. So yeah, from a TikTok point of view, from a YouTube point of view, I think creators are having to adopt that. I think especially still with the sheer kind of rate of discovery though on these platforms, I don't think it's necessarily the be all and end all. A good video will still find the audience, but there's no denying that it will definitely kind of help you and give you that little boost in the early days.
Yeah, completely. And if you're someone who wants to go into this, full time, become a content creator, a video content creator specifically across multiple platforms, having that understanding of SEO and how it can be applied to video content and those platforms is really important. I do personally think, like you said, that a lot of content that's going to rise to the top is actually based around humor, not necessarily strategy. I still think humorous, funny, ad hoc, informal, off the cuff content kind of is usually the stuff that goes viral, and then people get known off the back of that still. I could just be because I'm a big comedy fan, but those are always the ones that I save, that I share, so maybe that's just me though.
No, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It does come back to this whole kind of argument that good content, especially on these platforms where they are kind of optimized for reach and discovery, even of accounts that maybe have never had that before, it will always find a way to bring in the numbers. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do everything you can to try and help that on its journey anyway. I look at the stats for the YouTube short, the how to write an indie song one, and literally like 80% of the views are from search and discovery, not from the short speed, not from people going to my channel because they're like following me. It's literally from SEO. So it does have a place, and can pull a video up that perhaps wasn't destined to perform really, really well without that.
Yeah, Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really solid strategy to implement ASAP, basically. If you have
Yeah.
that library of content, we were saying, going back and kind of re-optimizing as well old videos. I've heard Gary V, for example, saying that that's a really strong strategy that his team implements over time. So a question that we had come in from someone in our new business team was about the de-influencing trend that we see across social media. So what do you make of that? I am someone who is maybe a bit pessimistic, and I kind of think it's a faux fad, basically. It's a faux trend. I don't necessarily think de-influencing is a thing. And they were also concerned about, potential declining consumer trust. But to reference the de-influencing trend, is it something that content creators should be worried about if they have brand partnerships?
Do you know, I look at it in a slightly different way. I think basically, there's two kind of ways to look at this. There's kind of if you release any product, really, and there's always going to be people saying things negatively. And the thing is, in this day and age of reach being readily available, and discovery coming to people who perhaps weren't even looking at it, there's not necessarily, other than key names within your industry or like a gigantic celebrity, there's not necessarily a huge risk, I think, of people warning you off things, because there's a whole really a whole list of reasons why people make purchases, isn't there? From and it'll never normally be just one thing. You might have been recommended it, but before that you might have seen it on TV, and then after you recommended it, you might have got an email about it, and then they might have done a sale, and then you might finally have bought it. And if one of those things leaves the mix, or one of those things actually warns you off it, there might still be three other things that kind of told you that you should buy it for whatever reason. So I think also what we have to be aware of as well is there are a lot of influencers now that they're not followed necessarily purely because like to kind of on them or keep up with them, but there are some influencers, I think some of the ones that I've seen, not going to name any names because some of them are kind of moving into the business space and might be on LinkedIn, but there are a lot that kind of actually are more followed for controversial reasons, or people just want to keep up with basically whatever stupid thing they're saying right now. So I don't think it's a huge worry, and I think any brand that's really worried about it, if you really strongly believe in your product, then you shouldn't need to worry about it. So maybe think about, right, why am I worried about this? What part of my product is making me worried about de-influencing, and addressing that, as opposed to kind of just spending too long thinking we need to keep this out of the hands of influencers that might say bad things. Because realistically, someone with 10 followers could make a video tomorrow about something terrible about your product and get 100,000 likes and 2 million views. That could happen, and it does happen. So from the de-influencing point of view, in terms of the influencer space itself and whether influencers should be worried, I mean, one thing I always think from an agency perspective is someone who isn't afraid to de-influence and to talk negatively on an experience or a product or a brand. I'm quite neutral towards it, because I mean, it's rather people who are kind of rushing to social media to talk about things if they're not that important, and they're kind of just doing it for the drama and for the numbers, puts me off. But equally, there's something to be said about the authenticity and in some ways the courage that someone with a full-time job, it requires for someone whose full-time job relies on them being positive about things, coming on and basically burning that bridge to the ground with a potential client. So yeah, there's pros and cons, but you just got to look at it from a case-by-case basis and just think, how, if this was to happen to me, what would it mean? How could I address it? Example, we had a client who was, I can't remember if we were working together at the time, Katie, who wasn't treated very kindly due to a genuine mistake as well on a TV show by a very famous comedian and TV host, and nothing came off it. Millions of views, a very influential name in the world of calling out scams, and nothing bad happened off the back of it. So don't worry too much.
I actually do remember that, and I remember it being a big drama our side, and thinking, oh God, how is the client gonna deal with this, and do we respond, do we say nothing, is it, it is so true. And I feel like to address the de-influencing thing from a consumer side as well, you have to forget people are not sheep. They have their own minds, they have their own bank accounts, every circumstance is different, so people are going to view one person's thoughts on a product differently to another. And even if you follow an influencer and have done for years, it doesn't necessarily mean you buy into absolutely every part of their opinions. So I don't necessarily, that's why I think I don't necessarily think it's something for brands or agencies or content creators to necessarily be concerned about. Particularly, I think it's just another thing that's kind of in the cycle of that negative press, really.
Exactly, and price and value for money will always be massive determining factors anyway. So someone might say something's bad, but if it's a tenner, they might still give it a go. And even nowadays with larger items as well, where there's a big difference in price points between different companies, someone might have worse reviews than the other person, or someone might have talked them out of it, but it might be £200, it might be £1,000 instead of 1,200, so they just take the chance anyway. So it's all relative, really.
It is. So when we're talking about influencers and we're talking about different kind of demographics and different consumers, when it comes to young influencers, and I'm not quite sure of what age to kind of define what a young influencer is, because you kind of have 14-year-olds dancing up to I don't know again what you describe as being young, but how old are you seeing some of the youngest influencers on say TikTok, for example, because I think that is very much a young skewing audience, and then what is in place as far as to kind of safeguard and protect the young and also vulnerable potentially, because I know it's an issue that concerns a lot of parents. We do have a number of people who have children in our agency, and I think maybe there is a subconscious concern there.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping I'm going to get this right, but I'm pretty sure. So one of the big kid names in influencing and YouTube especially is Ryan's Toy Review, who's now Ryan's World. Huge YouTube channel, and if I remember this right, he was, I think he's 11 now. I'm pretty sure he started like 7 or 8 years ago, so like 3 or 4, which is crazy. And obviously parents are monitoring these channels, but there's only so much you can do. I think to be honest, the thing is, with being an influencer at any age, you're always going to attract negativity and things worse than negativity as well. There's always going to be bad stuff out there. I think from a parent's point of view, it's so hard to comment, because it really is kind of each to their own. I know there's some people who are mortified, and literally to the parents who blur their kid's face in any photo or put a GIF over because they don't want anyone to see that. And then there are also parents who are starting up their kids' YouTube channels on their behalf. I think one of the best things I've seen is when people make it really, really clear that the parent monitors the account, and don't. Someone, if you're 10 and you're filming a YouTube video and they really like doing it or whatever, and it's being done that way, they don't need to read the comments necessarily. You can just cherry pick a few of the good ones to tell them about. But equally, I do think on the other hand, it would be worth, if they are attracting a chunk of negativity, if it's kind of 1% for every 99%, then maybe it's less important. But I do think it would be important. Personally, I'd feel it'd be important to mention that this stuff does exist, that some people just don't like your videos for no real reason, because I think it would be a huge shock if that switch from being parent monitored to taking on your own account and suddenly seeing people telling you to die, or that you're ugly, or that your videos are rubbish, would come as a huge shock if you just thought you were mega famous and loved by everyone. I think that's a bridge that will be tough to cross for a lot of these kind of parent-child influencer relationships. But from a kind of safeguarding point of view and stuff like that, I think it's very much up to each individual parent and what you post and what you don't. But I mean, I would personally, if I was a parent and doing this, I think I would be very cautious, just because there are so many weirdos out there. but I don't think, I think for me, it would only come from if the child had a massive passion. But I think this is just going to become more of an issue as time goes on, because kids are learning about YouTube earlier and earlier these days and wanting to do it earlier and earlier. And, if that becomes their hobby, whereas badminton might have been their hobby before, you'd buy them a badminton racket. Should you help them make a YouTube video? I don't know. It's a hard one to answer. It's just not black and white.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, as you'd said, younger and younger audiences are discovering social media, their friends are into it. Watching YouTube has become the way to stream TV. Not a lot of Netflix, I think, or what's popular on Netflix necessarily is relevant to children. And obviously you can find your kind of niches and your tribes, even as a young person on social media, which is why it feels like there's that community base for them. So I think, as you'd said, it really has to be the parents looking at what's happening with the community, what's happening with the comments in there, and embracing it in a way, because like you said, it's not something that's going to go away. It really is, potentially can be a hobby, something of interest. They can meet new people in their area across the world, but also could turn into somewhat of a career potentially. And that is just how things are moving nowadays. We talk about AI and machine learning kind of taking over jobs of people, but I don't see it, that being any stopping anytime soon. And I kind of see, working in digital fields, working into content creation fields like this is kind of that generation's next step into the world of working. My last question here is from me. So I wanted to ask about kind of influencers' careers evolving past social media. So when I said this, I think people didn't really understand what I was talking about. So just to clarify, what I mean is when an influencer decides, okay, I am done being the face of my posts, of my feed, my profile. I don't want to do social media as much anymore. I like doing the content creation side of it. Have you seen people's careers move past that? I mean, we kind of mentioned about people having teams around them, creating the content for them. But do you think it's possible to kind of parlay what you've done as an influencer into a career within a relevant field? Is that possible? Have you seen it?
It's tough. I've never so I think what hasn't happened yet is someone fully step away. So even if you take Zoella for example, who kind of, she always went under the name Zoella, and then she kind of did is transition and turn Zoella into like a lifestyle brand, and a kind of digital magazine and kind of content house, and turned her own socials into her own personal name. It's Zoe Sugg. Zoella has, I've actually just pulled up the page now, so I kind of give you the accurate stats. So it's over 1 million followers on Instagram, but kind of getting like under 1,000 to a few thousand likes per post. So not a great engagement rate by a long shot. Now, one of the reasons why that maybe, even though she doesn't talk about it a ton, is one of the reasons why it probably still does continue to exist, though, is because she herself is still making content. She's still posting on Instagram. I don't follow her much, so I couldn't say she's posting on other channels, but I imagine she is. Alfie, he's still making content, making videos, so they're kind of still around, which is probably keeping that brand alive at the point that it's at. And even if you look at the Sidemen and KSI and launching all these businesses, Grace Fit, all of these people launching businesses, they still also, well, they still make all their own content. They're still making content as well. So it's no one's really fully stepped back. Even Keemstar over in America, he announced that Drama Alert was no more. He was going to find a new host, and I'm pretty sure he did for a while. Might even still be, but he's still posting, still actively involved on Twitter, still driving the engagement and awareness around it. So I think, I think it's tough. It's kind of like if you had a presenter for a TV show, and they were the face of it, and it depends who you replaced them with. But if the TV show was them and their lives, you probably couldn't swap someone else in. If it's Bake Off and you swap one comedian for another comedian, then the show lives on. But I think with this, where stuff is so kind of centered around the individual, it's near on impossible. I think the only way to step back is to launch a brand that is so removed from yourself that you don't need to. But from a content perspective, probably not. From an actual transactional selling something online and people buying it, yeah, quite possibly, if you can build a good enough company.
Yeah, I think, and the point behind all of that is you're still able to utilize the skills that you've learned. So marketing, content creation, PR and communications, network building, but not necessarily being the face of it. So if you are able to, for example, launch your own company under, a different name, or its own brand name, you can then still apply those skill sets and be successful with it without having to be the face. But you're right, there is sometimes a disconnect, but between the two, and it wouldn't necessarily be easy to step away if you are the person, if you are your brand, which is cheesy to say, but it's true. Then it's going to be hard to disconnect yourself from kind of the fame that you've built for your name. And when you mentioned actually Zoella just then, I immediately thought of Ella Woodward, who did Deliciously Ella. Yeah, so she was a food blogger to start with, I believe, and obviously on social media, I think predominantly Instagram. And I was thinking, I haven't seen her content for a long time, but I went into Waitrose, and her food is everywhere. She has Deliciously Ella yogurts and granolas and coffees now. So she's really, from what I can see, taking a step back as being the face of the brand and actually focusing on the product line itself. So you can see how there is a way to build out a career path past influencing, and still using the skills that you've learned.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, she does some of the content on the actual brand account still does feature her quite a bit. So she's still kind of there, but it is, like you say, it is removed from the actual product in many ways. So I think that's the thing, though. She made something that people actually liked and got big stockists and that kind of, it's in Waitrose, it looks nice, it tastes nice, so people will buy it. And it's probably bought majority by people who don't even know who she is. Exactly. So that's kind of her way of doing it. So yeah, it can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it does give credibility to, kind of looping it back to what we were saying about at the beginning, as you can be an influencer, but you can be a content creator, and actually you can be a brand builder. And I do feel like for a lot of people who are very driven, maybe kind of brand building content creators are the next entrepreneurs. This is how it's going to happen with these kind of digitally first brands. And they can build out into physical as opposed to starting the other way around. You're kind of building your clout from the beginning, gaining your audience from the beginning, and then launching yourself, launching your product.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think we're just about at time now. I just want to thank you for your time, for answering those questions, for giving us some of the kind of tricks of the trade. And thank you again. And we'll chat soon, undoubtedly. We'll work together soon, undoubtedly.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.